Ready to go, ladies and gentlemen? Is everyone here? Yeah, should we just get cracking? Yeah? Okay. So I think we're going to start. Let me just check the time. Yeah, we're already 7 minutes behind in true conference style. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is John Beauchamp, and it's a pleasure to be here. I was very kindly invited by ENRS to moderate this panel on museum participation and shaping of museum narratives. As you can see, we have a slight change to the lineup today, but I'll let Chiara introduce herself in just one moment. And exactly, before we get to the panel itself, the format of today's panel will be that each speaker will introduce themselves for about 2 to 3 or even 4 or 5 minutes, depending, and then we shall start the discussion. So first of all, may I introduce Martin Klimza from the Museum of Victims of Communism in Košice in Slovakia.
Yeah, is that working? So hello everyone, good afternoon actually. So yeah, my name is Martin Klimza. I'm a representative of the Museum of Victims of Communism in Košice. So first of all, I want to thank the NRS, Mr. Rogulski, for inviting us, because we are a pretty young museum. We only opened in June 2021, but even so, the museum deals with the topic of persecutions during communism, and basically we have 3 exhibitions, permanent exhibitions at the moment. The first one deals with the testimonies of these victims. We also give short overviews of all the different persecutions, the types of persecutions that happened. There we also have our kind of specialty, which is a map of these victims, where we use the database to actually show each village and the number of the persecuted people in every village and city in Slovakia. Then the second exhibition deals with the Library of Samizdat and Exile Literature of Mr. Rudolf Fibi. There we speak about how people fought against the regime in the 70s and 80s, not through weapons or not through warfare, but mostly with pens and typewriters. And then the third exhibition is our newest ones, which is the former interrogation prison of the State Security, which is housed in the State Research Library of Košice. And basically there we talk about what these prisoners who were interrogated by the secret police were doing more or less for over 40 years when it was a prison.
Okay, interesting. So certainly a number of narratives which can come out of such a museum. So many thanks for that. Next in line, we have Chiara Nencioni. I'm sorry. And Chiara has very kindly agreed to stand in for Paolo Pezzino. Chiara is is affiliated with the University of Pisa, yeah. Yes, and is the member of the Ferruccio Parri network, which is a network of 67 institutes of resistance and contemporary history based in Milan. So explain.
Okay.
What will you be telling us?
May I have the slide, the PowerPoint presentation?
Has it been delivered to our lovely people?
Yeah, it's a Paolo Pezzino slide.
Are the technicians aware of this? Here we go.
Okay. As you can see, I am not Paolo Pezzino. I didn't have the surgery to change my sex during the night, and I'm going to do all my best to talk instead of him. So, next slide, please. I'm talking about the National Museum of Resistance that is under construction in Milan. And there are 3 promoters. One is the Italian Ministry of Cultures, the Municipality of Milan, and the Ferruccio Parri National Institute. thanks a lot. That has the scientific support, and Paolo Pezzino is the president of Ferruccio Parri National Institute. How to
it's
do
technology
that?
at its best. There we go.
Okay, so this is an institute that took name from Ferruccio Parri. Ferruccio Parri founded this institute. Okay, now it works? Okay. Great. So I have to come here back. So Ferruccio Parri founded this institute in 1949. He was a partisan. He was also the prime Italian minister after the liberation. And he donated all the documents of the Freedom Volunteers Corps to the Italian Republic. And today, Istituto Ferruccio Parri is, as John told before, is the network of 67 institutes connected all over Italy and related institutes about contemporary history and resistance. The new building you can see here, there are two buildings, one in face of the others, built in glass and steel, and they are projected by Herzog and de Meuron Architect Study, that is a Swiss architecture study, and they will host the museum. I can read you the words with which Sergio Mattarella, that is the president of our Italian Republic, said about the aim of our museum. The memory of those who fought to restore Italy's freedom should be preserved and passed on, not to reproduce division, but to consolidate and spread, especially among the younger generation, awareness and the inestimable value of democracy and freedom. The museum will be a three-dimensional museum, of course one physical place where visitors can come in, virtual, so a digital museum, because there are QR codes and there is a website you can see, and if you want, take notes of our website. So using QR code, you can go deeper of the topics, and a widespread museum, because there will be a network of a place of memories, museums, monuments, and things of the kind all over Italy. And we are also some connection with other European museums of resistance. As the museum is not a book, we privilege visual museum instead of many texts to read, and we are using images, documentary films, voices of witnesses, and also the opinion and the voice of visitors are important. The museum will offer to the visitors a complex imaging of the resistance, because there is not only one resistance, but many forms, many different forms of resistance. So it will provide different documents, scenarios, and narratives in order to debate about our history, our recent history. And first of all, we want to create awareness of what a citizen is, and of the human rights and the democratic values of our republic. As I told before, many people fought in the resistance, not only partisan with weapons, but also normal people that joined the Allied forces or helped people. You can see here these different people that joined what we say civilian resistance. So strikers, for instance, in 1944, all the people that decided to strike against the fascists were internated in concentration camp. Women assisting men at the front line or in the Maquis and the resistance, workers, peasants, and Italian military deportees in Germany. There were 600,000 people that decide not to fight anymore with the fascist Nazi regime, but to not to fight, and they were internated in concentration camps, political deportees, and clergy. You can see here the real photos in Milan. It's the 6th of May, 1945. It was the first parade after the liberation, and in the first line you can see all the partisan leaders coming from different political parties fighting all together against the Nazi fascism. And there was a National Liberation Committees that was kind of national committees working with the Allied to liberate Italy. And you can see here the museum plan, and underground 3 levels we will host the archives and the library. Then there is the entrance level, 3 levels for permanent exhibition, one of office, and under the room enough space for temporary exhibition. The first floor is dedicated to wars and fascism, and you can see each floor has 7 exhibition units, from the Great War to the rise of the fascism in the first floor. Second floor is about resistance and liberation. So from the 1943 until 1945. You can see here the exhibition units. And the third floor is about the Republic and the Constitution. And the last room is how to remember our resistance and how to face with our past. And each floor has 7 rooms. And the first room of each floor is an immersive room, so without object, without text, just to have a feeling and emotion. And in conclusion, to sum up, our museum has the aim to preserve and transmit memory of resistance, because in Italy we have many local museums of resistance, but not a national one. So we are going to build one, and to stimulate and improve the awareness of our values. So we are waiting for you in Milan. The inauguration will be on the 2nd of June 2026. The 2nd of June is a holiday in Italy, because in 2026 will be the 80th anniversary of the birth of our republic. So maybe we can host you, and we can host the next symposium in a couple of years in a new building, in the new museum in Milan. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Indeed, a round of applause. Our next speaker, moving swiftly on, because we still have a lot of discussion ahead of us, is Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt from Malmö University.
So, thank you everyone for staying here in the afternoon, and thank you for the kind invitation to share my work. I am not an institution. I'm just an individual researcher, but I have some connections both to University of Malmö from Sweden, but also Estonian National Museum, which is my sort of home country or birth country. And coming from Estonia, my connection to the Estonian National Museum and the great participatory initiatives that Estonian National Museum has done after opening its new building. I want to just mention the ideas of participation and the importance of that, to sort of come back to the panel theme. But as an introduction to myself, I need to mention that I'm a media and communication scholar. So I come from a different discipline, I come from a different field, and I feel that my presence and interaction with the sort of issues of museum and heritage and collaborations here have been very, very fruitful, because a lot of times I think that, especially my background in audience scholarship, meaning that I have worked with how people receive the messages that we want to send to them, is also a great challenge for the works in museum. Because we tend to think that people, if they are exposed to the museum, are passive receivers, and they will just get whatever we want to say as long as we get a hold of them. They would transmit our vision of history, or we transmit our knowledge to the audiences. However, the reality is, of course, that people have always been participating in active meaning making. It is just in the recent years, museums have started to take interest in what kind of sense people make out of this material. So I think that's my position towards participation, that it's always there, whether we care about it or not. But there are many different reasons how we can make it part of the museum story. So that's maybe about introduction for me.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Last, but by no means least, Karolina Ziębińska-Lewandowska from the Museum of Warsaw.
Thank you for inviting me here. So you would like rather that I present shortly the museum than the participatory projects for now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm the director of the Museum of Warsaw, that is composed of few different museums, and this is its specificity. So some of you perhaps visited the main site, which is in the completely reconstructed old town, and we occupy one whole part of the old town square, but we also have other museums within our conglomeration. And among them we have two memory places. One is Palmyra in Campinos, and the other is recently opened memory place at the cemetery at Wola, the cemetery of civilians of the Warsaw Uprising. And so the museum is quite old because it has almost 90 years. But it's operating actively only in the post-war period, and it developed a lot during the last few decades. And it also, a few years ago, had a very strong restoration of the main exhibition, and the issues of the original objects of the new technologies were very much discussed, and some very radical decisions were made, and it is still an ongoing discussion how to deal with these issues.
Exactly, an ongoing discussion. I would like to start our discussion this afternoon by going back to basics. Now, I'm a bit of a generalist. I don't know about our audience, but I know something about museums. I like going to them for a start. But when I hear about participatory museums, I really don't know what the deal is. I mean, how can the general public, participate in museums' activities? So my first question, and we'll start with Martin and then move on, unless you would like to jump in. I would like to ask, what is a participatory museum, and what does participation actually mean today in the context of museums and museum narratives in particular? So, Martin. Start of a test.
So, when talking about participatory museum, we first have to talk about, why we even need such a museum. From what I've heard, and I forgot, but I tried to keep the 3-minute mark, that I work as a lecturer in the museum, so I mainly meet visitors from schools and school groups. And mostly, history, in their eyes, is seen as basically just a boring university subject. It's lengthy presentations, it's lectures, it's just like on all professors standing in front of the speaker box and speaking to them for 2 hours. And I think that first of all, why you need these participatory museums is because you want to kind of get back that spark of curiosity in these people, to actually see that, you know, they can actually influence what the narrative actually is, right? And participation is not just something that is interactive with the people, but for me, it's definitely something that actually stays behind in the museum for the next visitor, right? It might be one exhibit. It might be a story that you, as a museum guide, can actually use and, you know, talk to other groups, right? So for me, that's why participation is so important, and that's why I think it should be definitely used, especially with younger visitors.
Chiara, can you say something about museum participation in the context of the museum in Milan? Have you been given any kind of secrets about what's in store?
So the museum was born from a participating planning, and so every phase of the concept, the development of the museum has been discussed with other partners, and as you have just told, interaction is very, very important, and we publicly communicated all the phases of the museum, and I think that the information is the first level for citizen participation. And the discussion is not extended only to historians or people that already knows something about resistance and contemporary Italian history, but also European history. But the museum has to talk to everybody, and so we invited individuals, but also associations, to give us a contribution, different kind of contribution, ideas or material contribution, providing witnesses, testimonials, documents, but also photos, images, objects, everything that can increase our collection.
Pille?
So let me very briefly put on my professor hat here, because this is one of the subjects that I've been really researching quite a lot. And so participation, one could first divide it as a sociological or political concept. Sociological concept, you showed up to the museum, you are participating. You've read a book, you're participating in culture. Well done, you. So this is one of the baseline ideas of participation. And the political idea, of course, is has your showing up made any difference? Has it impacted the power? Has it challenged the grand narrative of the museum? Have you left a mark? And there we can divide the participation into temporal, very brief one. I came, I visited, I listened to a guide, I asked a question, I participated.
Went to the gift shop.
Went to a gift shop, left my money there, also important participations. Or something I did, or I told you a story and you could put it in a storage. I gifted you an item. I told you my narrative, you could film it, it's part of the museum collections. So it can be very temporary or it can be very permanent. I also could have come in and said, you know, the way that you classify your items is actually not very nice towards my people, my culture, my group. And then if you go on then and challenge the whole metadata concepts, that might be even more participatory. I might even challenge the whole concept of the museum.
But aren't we then talking about inclusivity rather than participation, or are the two mutually exclusive?
They're definitely not mutually inclusive, because for participation to be able to happen, you have to include someone. Because it's of course the question of sort of like, in a very classical, again, participatory ladder, it starts by access. It starts by you being able to reach the museum, whether digitally or in person, so that if you're not able to reach the museum, if museum is not able to get you, there is no participation. There's no sociological participation, there's no political participation. Then the next step, which oftentimes museums tend to kind of mix up with participation, is the interaction. I came to your museum day, I made a soap, or my kid was there and they painted a wonderful picture, and the picture is hanging in the museum. is that participation? Did it make a difference for the museum? So it is also a question of where do degrees of participation lie? And if you would have asked me 15 years ago, I would have said every museum must be participatory. Today I'm saying no, not every museum needs to be participatory. It's a strategic choice, but it has to make sense for the museum, because not everything can be solved with participation, and it's not necessarily like a magic wand that we wave over the museum and we erase lots of bad things. So participation is one way of making sure that people's stories are more represented, but not the only way.
Very interesting. And actually, going to Karolina now, since the Museum of Warsaw has so many different departments or so many different sites, are they all participatory? I mean, like, how does participation work, let's say, in the Museum of Warsaw?
Well, already Pille complicated a little bit the concept of the participatory museum, and I think it's important that we don't mix up things. And I definitely agree. I mean, I would even say that the first stage, I wouldn't call it like the participation in the sense we are trying to discuss here, because as far as I understand this panel, we are discussing the new understanding of participation, which is a new method of work of the museum with, not with the public, with society. And I don't think that a big museum can be entirely participatory in the sense that the society has an impact on the stories that a museum tells. But it is great if a museum tries by parts do this, but it is very difficult. So I would say that, of course, we all know that the museums last years changed a lot and they opened up enormously to the public. They even became, the big museums, the entertainment places, which is not the participatory museum as I understand it. But in the Museum of Warsaw, what we are trying to do is to, by small projects, we are trying to change the methodology and to change our position, which demands a complete, I would say, revolution in our heads as curators, custodians, historians, and the like knowledge carriers. And we are, I think that perhaps it is a little bit easier for us because the museum is run by women, so for us it is much easier probably to take this position not of the superior carrier of knowledge. So we are rather starting with the statement that we know that we don't know, and we are curious what other knows. And we ask others what they know and what kind of questions they are asking, because these are questions that we would not ask probably as trained historians. And this is the starting point for our participatory projects. And then I don't know when is the moment when you would like that I just give, for example, 2 examples.
You can go for it now.
Okay, so I would like to mention for now 2 examples, which are for me the participatory project, and that really changes the place of the museum within the society, and it changes the relation with our public. One is a project which is called Many Hands. And we used a platform that allows to download in the internet. We download 5,000 photographs, and we opened a call for people to do descriptions and identification of these photographs. Because you know that in the museums it's a huge issue, and the employees cannot identify too many images at one time. So to make them accessible, we asked people to provide information. And we had 200 people who registered, and among them, 40 were just like excellent experts that we have perhaps 2 in the museum of this level that specifically know a period of the Warsaw history. And within 4 months, we had 5,000 photographs being well described. So of course we have to check it, but then we have the whole group that we can address and ask for help. And the people were doing this for free, and even if they could win some prize or something, this wasn't important for them. So this is one example. The second is that we started a few months ago a long-term project, and we invited families to work with us on an exhibition, which won't be entirely participatory, but it is a dialogue. So we work with them with items from our collections, and these items, they are supposed to catalyze the stories and the memories that come from their memories, but they also tell us and talk with us how they would like to have this story being told, to be more communicative. So I give these examples because for me this is the participatory way for a museum to work. But this goes more in quality than in quantity, because you can work with a very small group of people on long term. But as the final effect, this will bring us more public, because we already had this kind of experiences.
Many thanks. Pille, you wanted to chime in.
I just wanted to chime in because it's a great indication that when the participation is very simple for people, then you can include a lot of people. If it just is about pressing a button, yes, no, it's very easy. But if you want people to commit to describing photos or committing over long term, then of course you can only engage very few. And that's also sort of something to be aware of, that participation does cost a lot of human resources, not necessarily money-wise, but it costs a lot of people's time. But I just wanted to also give you a name for the, or an idea for a name. In Sweden, we've experimented with the concept of method of the thing. As thing is a wonderful word in Swedish because it means both the item or the object, but it also means an old language for parliament. And the idea with method of the thing is that you let the thing call the questions and ideas of people. So you, exactly as you mentioned, you pick a few items from the museum collections and you invite other people, you invite families, community, people to come together around that item and ask their questions, pose their challenges, ask their stories, ask more details about any kind of things. And that kind of network of connections that you can then make through that thing, the thing itself becomes a site of gathering, a site of participation. It's quite a good way to, because the other thing that happens with participation is that people distinguish between, oh, we are working towards collections, or we're working towards the public. Because that's oftentimes the division people make. And that kind of method of the thing, or object-centered participation, can bring those two things together in a really, really wonderful way.
It's a very interesting point you make, and I also wanted to refer to what you were speaking about earlier, that nowadays, like 15 years ago, you'd say that yes, museums must be participatory, and now maybe not so much. And as I work as a journalist on a day-to-day basis, so I'm kind of cynical about pretty much everything. And I wanted to ask, especially when we speak about museums and participation in museums, can't it just be viewed as some sort of manipulation which conceal the inequalities between the relationship between the public and the museum? Museums are now being, let's say, asked very kindly to, let's say, open their doors to the public and engage with the public, and so that they participate. Do museums really want people to participate? Is it basically not greenwashing, participation washing? You know, we hear all the time now that museums want to kind of bring people into the fold and become active, engaged in the museum's, let's say, the program. But is it, you know, I still have a feeling that it's not quite what we're aiming for. Karolina, you want to say something?
It depends on the museum. I would say that, like City Museum, it's so enriching to have people like really participate, but perhaps not for an art museum, it is more difficult. I don't say that it's not possible, but it's more difficult. We wouldn't make our most successful exhibition on photography of Warsaw of the 1990s without a huge call for photographs that we made. We had an enormous response. It costed a lot to work on that, but we dedicated the whole room that was curated by our curators, but we invited among all the people who brought their photographs, we have chosen 40 people, and this really changed the shape of the exhibition, and it was the biggest success. And we learned so much. We discovered so many new photographs that we would never have in the collection, and some of these photographs, of course, end up in our collection. And this is something specific for the history museums, where people bring things and that their private parts of their private lives are important for these more general stories that the museum is supposed to tell.
Of course, so it's not just a box-ticking exercise, right? Martin, you wanted to say something.
Yes, so when talking about manipulation, I think it's maybe a bit harsh of a word, because of course you can't manipulate people to participate. And I think that this, you said about this hiding between the museum and the public. I think that it's actually the opposite. It can be an opportunity for the bridging of this divide that naturally, of course, happens. And I want to talk about how we deal with probably like organic participation. So we deal with stories of victims of this communism regime through 50s, 60s, all the way to the end in 1989. And the map that I talked about, there people can actually see details about their family, about how long they were imprisoned for. And many times I see not just organized group, but like ordinary visitors. I say ordinary visitors, basically going through these persecutions, knowing or getting to know these personal stories of these people, and then when they come to the map, we actually have a place to sit down. Most of the times we actually find someone from their family, and they kind of naturally want to open up and want to contribute to the museum. It's a very large database of these victims. It's more than 104,000 people that we have in this database. So naturally there are some factual errors, I would say. So even that can be a way of participating, that they can actually correct these details in a way if they find more, or if they have, for example, the court trial or the file of this victim, right? So I think that you should always strive for organic participation, not just it can be, as you said, a call for photographs. We've done that as well. We just started one partnership with an art schools that actually try to recreate or try to look at the occupation in 1968 in a way that through children's eyes, basically. And so we kind of did that. So that can be also a way of participation. But in my opinion, organic participation, if it's possible, of course, is the best way to actually achieve it.
Very interesting, and I wanted to now move, let's say, slightly away from participation and look at the creation of museum narratives. Now, when we think of a museum, we go to a museum, we are, let's say, fed, and I do this on purpose, information, knowledge, what was spoken about in great detail in the last panel. I would like to ask our esteemed panelists here about the freedom and creativity of the exhibition team, so the people working in museums, versus the expectations of the public or maybe experts. And how can these two issues be bridged? When you are in a museum, you look, obviously, everything you see, some sort of decision must have been made behind that, whether it's a piece of text on a wall or whether it's a picture hanging up in the hall, right? So I would like to know about how this idea is bridged between the creativity of the exhibition teams and the curators versus, the expectations of the public, what they want to see. Chiara's nodding. Do you have something to say? I don't think you have to press anything. Please don't press anything.
Does it work?
Okay,
yes. Well, first of all, I think that participation and manipulation has not to walk together, because sometimes manipulation comes not only from down to up, but also sometimes up to down, especially when there is a political connection or political financing. And you know, in Italy, in this period, the resistance is not so popular from a political point of view, and there are kind of censura about political speeches concerning resistance. And well, I think that participatory museum is something like a museum from everybody, but it doesn't depend only on accessibility. And I think that there could be 3 levels of narratives in a museum. The first one could be the voices to the narrators, such as witnesses and also people who took part in the story we are narrating the museum. And the second point is the historian's voice, because you know, you can create a museum that can speak to everybody, can talk to everybody, is addressed to everybody, but you don't have to forget the renounce to the scientific accuracy, because scientific accuracy and knowledge is the base of a museum, is the base of the values, the human rights. So you can only listen to what politicians say or to what public expects from the museum. So, for instance, in our museum, we are listening the voice of 9 different historians, 3 of them for each floor in short videos, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, to have different point of view of experts on the same point. And of course, the third level of narration is connected with the visitors. So the visitors' expectation, but also the visitors' opinion, because visitors must have the opportunity to share their opinion, to ask questions, and also ask for clarification or express their point of view. So that's why we decide to have in each floor 2 cultural mediator, expert not only in history but also in pedagogy, because participation is, of course, first of all for students and children and people that can grow up in a democratic country. So we have to improve such things. And interaction in museology. So I think that we have to mix participation and scientific accuracy, and to give voices to everybody who wants to take part in the life of the museum.
Thank you very much. Pille, would you like to say something?
I'm a bit hesitant to sort of juxtapose the idea of museum experts and the participants. As we just heard from Warsaw example, you can find people who are much more experts outside the museum as well. So it's not just that museum has a monopoly of expertise. And I think that's quite dangerous thinking that participation is for specific groups only or for specific ideas. But let me tell you an anecdote of, or not actually an anecdote, it's a real thing that happened in Estonian National Museum when we started experimenting with participatory museum. And then we did, Estonian National Museum is an ethnographic museum, so it's not an art museum. And in that museum, it's of course a history of Estonianness from 11,000 years ago till today. And we thought, okay, we just want to let people say what they want to see in a museum. So we made open call for participants and participatory exhibitions. And then let the public vote as well. So it was open call, but also public voting. In that public voting, 2 exhibitions won. One was an exhibition about funeral cultures, and the other one was an exhibition about national costumes. So Estonian National Museum's sort of curatorial idea of let's open up the museum, make it more contemporary, let's bring diversity of voices in, ended up with 2 most conservative examples of participatory exhibitions ever imaginable. So most classic ethnographic museum exhibitions you can think of. So in that sense, the curatorial freedom is oftentimes very necessary to actually push the public image about the museum to a new place. Because public, in general, is oftentimes much more conservative than an advanced thinking and great curator. So to have that balance of voices sometimes means actually not that the public is challenging the museum, but vice versa. The museum needs to have space to challenge the public.
That's a very interesting point. When I was thinking about these topics before this panel, again, you know, inviting the public in. I mean, I'm originally from Great Britain, where a few years ago there was a public a plebiscite to name a lifeboat, and the Brits came up with the name Boaty McBoatface. And this is why I kind of have real reservations about inviting the public into anything. Well, maybe this is just the British public, that they just start making fun of things rather than taking things seriously. Sorry? I mean, I know it's an amazing name, but like, you can't have a lifeboat called Boaty McBoatface, right? I mean, like, it's a nice idea, but, you know, let's try and be serious here. Anyway, Martin, is there anything that would you like to add about the exhibition team versus, you know, the museum versus the public, and in terms of expectations? I mean, what does it look like in your case in Slovakia?
Well, I mean, our case is a bit maybe special because since we are dealing with a quite recent topic, there is still a lot of nostalgia about this period. There is still a lot of people who remember this period, so they have their expectation of, you know, they lived through it, they know how it was, right? I hear that a lot. I know how it was during that time. But you know, we kind of had to, we made the decision to actually focus solely on the victims, even though people maybe would like some more context in terms of political context, or how the party worked, or how the general communist regime worked. But you know, we have decided to actually honor the victims, to focus specifically on them, and then if some context is needed, we will then provide it with our guided tours, or you know, we are there in the museum, so they can ask us always about this kind of stuff.
Karolina.
I just wanted to add something, because I think it is actually very risky to do kind of like in advance voting for what you would like, and to have a very open question, because how I could vote what I want to see in the Science Center Copernic. I don't know enough what are the possibilities, but I think that the way to do this is to listen to the feedbacks that we have to what we've already done. And in one of our 2 memorial places, we had such a situation. This is the Izba Pamięci, where our permanent exhibition, it's a very conceptual and not necessarily, yeah, it is very, very beautiful, but not necessarily very intuitive installation of worldwide known artist Krzysztof Wodiczko. So I would say that this is really for a very specific public. But before we installed this, for 1 year, we had a temporary, very simple installation of the map of Warsaw. It was the map made from the planes, the map of the ruined Warsaw, and the places of the massive executions were marked with red nails. And the people loved this so much that when they heard that we will close it because we have some other plans, they were not happy, and this made us to the decision. This brought us to the decision to recreate this installation in a permanent form because people really need it and want it. And it is similar for another exhibition about the reconstruction of Warsaw. It had such a good response for the visitors that in long term we decided to transform it into our permanent exhibition in one of our dependencies. So I would say that this is the way to react and to answer and to address the need of our spectators and visitors.
Thank you for that. I'm just looking at the time here. We have 10 more minutes before we open up the floor to questions from the public. So I'm going to go and throw kij mrowisko, as we like to say in Polish, or as I try to say in Polish. So I like to put a stick in the ant nest. And I would like to ask, we've been talking a little bit about this. We've touched upon this a couple of times during today's discussion, and that is about top-down versus bottom-up narratives. So my final question before we open up is, with the ongoing democratization of culture and museum participation, I mean, have we seen a paradigm shift in the way museums present their collections or histories? And I know that some of us have already mentioned this throughout this discussion, but just to kind of synthesize the difference between top-down and bottom-up, and how museums now actually present their collections and adjust their narratives accordingly. Martin, can we start with you?
Yes, so it's, as you said, it's something I touched upon briefly, but basically I am, and since my university studies, I've always been a supporter of the bottom-up narrative, because you can see through, let's say, just a story of one family during communism. You can see all the different types of all the different things that affected them, right? So you can touch upon much more topics than if you went with the top down, or just for example, the political history or the high history. So I've always been a proponent of that, and you know, given that we deal with personal stories of these people, testimonies of these people, we also deal with the bottom-up narrative. However, I mean, there is some merit in the top-down narrative if you are a museum that deals specifically with high histories or medieval stuff, for example, right? But even then, you can use a story of one peasant through time actually to see how it affected him or how it didn't affect him at the time.
Thank you very much. Chiara, would you like to chime in?
So, well, I think that only one top-down narrative could be a kind of not democratic one, but because there are many narratives about the same topic, and I don't think that for instance, this history of resistance has many voices and many souls, but also we don't want to give up the voice to unculturated or maybe someone that can share memories, because memories is a kind of narration, but it's not historical narratives. So we have to share personal narratives, personal stories, come bottom up with the real accuracy that only historians can have after years and years of study. And so I think that we have to mix all these things.
Okay. Pille?
I just want to sort of, again, complicate things a bit by mentioning two dimensions in that question. One thing is authoritative voice or open voice. So it can be told, a story can be told in a very authoritative voice, there's only one right at the end of it, or it can be said, okay, you make up your own mind. The other dimension is monovocal or multivocal. Monovocal being it's just one person telling the story, and multivocal is many people telling the stories. you can do multivocal authoritative, meaning that you can have many people telling this is the only right way to interpret this discussion. Or you can do monovocal but open story. So
we're going into politics of memory there and things like that, right?
A little bit, but it is something to sort of like when you ask top down or bottom up, in a sense that is it that bottom up is open for interpretation, or is bottom up when many people can have a say? Or is it bottom-up when people can set the agenda of the discussion? So what we mean by bottom-up is so many different ways in thinking about it.
More like grassroots narratives, that's what I really had in mind, as opposed to, let's say, a top-down, because if it's top-down, well, again, I'm going to get political because it's about who is sponsoring, who is funding these institutions, right? And that actually can actually have a major effect on which narratives are presented and how, yeah?
And it is, of course, way of sort of saying, like, we have one sponsor, we have the one sponsor, oftentimes state, with a very strong voice, or maybe it's EU, with a sort of like our wonderful colored flag. It is then, or we could sort of say, we have a very strong LGBTQ agenda. And then there can be people who are going like, yeah, this is the way for museum to be open. Other people will look at the same LGBT exhibition and say, nah, you're just pushing one top-down narrative. And it oftentimes also depends whether you yourself are in the bottom or on the top to sort of say whether the museum narrative has been from top down or bottom up. So I think in this case, sort of refuse to take a bite and sort of say that it's one right way. But just want to sort of mention another great example that Estonian National Museum did for a participatory exhibition, which was about 90s. And that's sort of like the whole idea of how much easier or more fun is participation when people are still sort of in the living memory. But this 90s exhibition was done by school children who were all born after 2000.
Oh, wow.
So they did an exhibition about times that they had not self-experienced. And that kind of like, if you think about it, that way of inviting young people in to learn about what for them is ancient history in 90s, and for most of museum workers is sort of, if not their teenage years, maybe their primes. It is something that is quite eye-opening for the museum to be seeing, to be able to sort of look at some same things from different perspectives. So again, setting the agenda or picking a museum set agenda and then sort of being able to say, give it sort of a voice or meaning. Or at the end of the day, there is always the open interpretation. Sort of, I'm going to go there and see and read and make up my own mind.
Fantastic, a lot to take in there. Karolina, would you like to add anything to that?
I think that Pille, she summed up in a very good way. I think it is much more complicated and multidimensional. I think that always the dialogue, curiosity, and not this position of like knowing everything is the best tool of negotiating in this sense and this sense and this and this and this.
Exactly, which is why I'm very much enjoying being a moderator on this panel. We are now half an hour away from the close of this session, so I would like to thank our panelists. No clapping just yet, we'll be doing that at the end. I would like to open up the discussion to the floor. Do we have anyone here who would like to ask a question to our esteemed guests? Because if not, we're just going to carry on talking. Yes, the lady here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was really an interesting conversation, and I have many questions, but I will try to limit myself to some practicalities. And my question relates more to methods and how to do it, because I love talking, like having theoretical discussions of what do we mean by a participatory museum. And I guess my first question, a short one, would be like, since Nina Simon's book on the participatory museum, which I think is kind of a first thing, is there anything else that changed radically since that book, like in terms of approaches? that is good to take away for museologists? And the second question is like, those of you who have done participatory practices of any sort, what kind of, like, let's say 3 points would you give to anybody who would like to start such a project, like lessons, advices, or what not to do? Because I know it takes a lot of resources, primarily of coordination and, well, human resources as well. So I would be curious of your advices on how to do and what not to do, maybe. Thank you.
Who wants to answer?
I can start, I'm sure. Everyone has great insights for this one, but about Nina Simon's book, I think the book is still absolutely valid. The views of this being a collection of examples that people can easily be inspired by, but it's also very clear that this is not a formula book that you sort of like add, it's not a cooking book for participation. So for me, 3 points or lessons in advice is first, think why you want to do it. What is it in it for you as to what are you hoping to gain with a participatory project? Doing participation just for participation's sake or sort of the greenwashing of the museum, that is not gonna, it's so much work that you better have a good plan. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I personally would not recommend start with people that are very far from museum. So instead of like, I'm going to do a participatory project with people who've never set a foot in a museum, I would start with people who are your long-term favorites, and then sort of work your way up from there, in a sense that a lot of people see participatory projects as a way to sort of like challenge the museum, bring the new audiences. I am not sure if bringing the new audiences is the best way for a participatory project for beginners. So that would be my second advice. And my third advice is, again, remember the sort of simple formula of having simple contribution, you can attract a lot of people. More complicated contribution, long-term involvement, just very few people. So there's like a pyramid, a medium complicated assignment, you can attract a medium amount of people. So if you want to sort of impress someone with big numbers, then ask people to do something that's very simple to do. That in Nina Simon's book is a contribution. If you want to sort of build long-term relationships, go with a smaller group with dedicated people. So it's a choice about, but then coming back to the first question, why you want to do it. What are you hoping to achieve? And only then start thinking about a particular method or approach.
Martin?
So, yeah, I mean, completely I agree with Pille. But one more thing that for me is as well, if it's possible, don't be afraid to change some things. Take as much feedback as you need, as you can actually, from the first couple groups. And even though you have a perfect plan in your head of what the people are going to do, how it's all going to work, how amazing it will be, you can bet that the people will never do what you want them to do. So be prepared to switch up some things if it's possible, of course, and yeah, take as much feedback as you can from the first couple groups.
Would any other panelists like to answer the question?
I like the part of your question, did it change radically something? I think that we are not experienced enough as the museum in the participatory projects to say so. But already the changes that I can observe since we realized small participatory projects, it's that our mindset as the museum staff has changed. And in a much better and deeper way than if I would, for example, would say, we need to think about our visitors. This is not enough. Thanks to these participatory projects, we really changed our position as the museum employees, and I think this is crucial.
Thank you for that. Back to the floor. Yes.
Thank I'm Simina Badika from the House of European History. Thank you for a wonderful discussion and very thought-provoking. So I want to share one comment and one question at the end of it to you. The comment would be that your discussion made me think of one of the best advices I got when I was raising my kids when they were small, and this was never ask them if they want to brush their teeth. Ask them if they want to brush it using the red toothbrush or the blue toothbrush, which worked quite well.
It works, doesn't it? Yeah, I can vouch for that.
Yeah, it works. The thing is, so I was thinking about that because I think we should be very careful not to do this with the public in the museum. So that would be one conclusion. And also to be aware when we do it, how we do it. Because in a way we do it, but let's not do it in a very simple way because our public is not 3 years old. But also to be conscious that in order not to get the maybe stupid answers or things you were talking about, it's also our responsibilities. We are the designers of this participation. So we are the ones who design the boxes in which our visitors come and share their ideas. So this is one thing. And the question I have is actually related to the museum where I work, which I presented in the morning, but if not, everyone was here. The House of European History is a museum based in Brussels, which aims to provide a transnational history of Europe and whose public, so whose audience is basically all Europeans. So it's the audience that we aim to reach is really, really even geographically very, very spread. So we've been struggling with participative projects and ideas for some years now. So my question to the panelists would be, how would they, if they have any idea, how would they approach this if they were working not in a museum that actually has a community who also lives nearby, which I think it's, or are we condemned to the online medium? Is this just, I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm just throwing this up here. Also because it's, as you said in the panel, it's not participation, it's not mandatory, it's not a given. It should really be suited and focused on what you want to achieve, what your topic is, and maybe sometimes it's just you have to find other ways or be very creative with what. So, yeah, just.
Thank you. Who would like to start? Karolina.
Can I just share a small thing? Because when you were talking about your museum, I thought that it is just a perfect place, of course, to cross different perspectives on histories. And I guess that you probably did this already. But we, for example, what we are doing is that we are inviting a small group, for example, of foreign students that are staying in Warsaw for 1 year or 2 or 3. And through the year, we work with them, and they are discovering the museum, they are discovering the history of Warsaw, but then they're choosing their way of telling the story. So they are choosing what is most important for them, so they bring their perspective. And I like very much this thing, because then you have perspectives from different nationalities and different backgrounds. And it's a simple way to do this. We just put, we have a color code for short panels. And we will be developing this now with the audio guys when we find a cheap way to do that in multiple ways. But I'm sure that you already did this kind of actions, no?
Pille and then Martin.
Okay, so I think, again, coming back to a bit of the red and blue toothbrush example, and I think that sometimes if you want to involve many people, then this is the extent of the question you can ask. It is the complication of choosing between two things and not necessarily always more. But to come back to the question of what kind of things you can do, one of the things that a lot of museums struggle with is when they say we are for everyone. And of course you are for everyone. Every museum wants to be for everyone. But to make participation meaningful, to make the exhibition sense-making meaningful, you have to sort of think who is everyone. And maybe tackle a small group of everyone's one at a time so that you could be able to sort of segment your audiences in a meaningful way. And I think the idea of using volunteers from visiting students or Erasmus students who probably come in hordes to Brussels is a very good way of, again, increasing the number of voices in a very low, as a low-hanging fruit. But again, back to the question, why do you think you need participation? And then you can sort of continue from there.
Martin.
Yes, so just again from my experience, I've seen some of your presentation in the morning. I don't think I've been here all the time, but I've seen that you are trying to build a transnational narrative, if I remember correctly. But at the same time, we have to remember that Europe was divided for a very long time. Therefore, I would suggest, or from my experience, I see that some narratives that are clearly understandable to Eastern Europeans are not understood by Western Europeans. So I would suggest maybe as one idea, maybe some messages between these two countries on how they reflect this period of their history, what they think of for example, normalization, what they think of the 70s, right? If this is something they were a part of or even heard of, right? I mean, I'm having to explain basic stuff like communism and totalitarian regime, right? To some of our visitors. So I would, because you are trying to build this translational narrative, I would use this divide as a way to get the people together in a way.
Very interesting answer there. Right, we open the floor once again. The gentleman over here, please.
Thank you. My name is also Martin, so don't confuse us. But a bit I would like to argue with Pille, and I'm entitled to because I'm also Estonian. So the participation in a museum, I think, and this is actually a question to all of you, that maybe the participation should be much wider than it's dealt with everyday museum life. The main thing when people think about participating in museums life is that we participate in exhibitions. What exhibition we want, how we want to see that, and what are the topics and how they are dealt with. But museum is a lot more than just exhibitions. And in my opinion, and it would be nice to hear your opinion, is that the museum should more get the people to participate in the everyday life. And especially, I think, they should be those persons who in their everyday life aren't close to the museums. Because 17 years ago, I started as a volunteer in a museum. Then I was a ticket seller, guide, researcher, curator, now I'm a member of board. So I would say that this most likely was a good choice to participate in the museum's everyday life. So, and I know that it's very hard to actually kind of influence or control or lead all of those persons who maybe have the idea to participate in the museum. But still, I think we should use more of the society we are actually working with.
Many thanks for that. Who wants to start?
I will of course start because that was a bit of a challenge for me, and I never have considered exhibition as the primary way of participation, but that's one of the most visible ways of participation. And one of the things with participation is once you make it visible, you can attract more of it. So when you have a ticket seller or a volunteer to the museum, if you then sort of clearly mark, this is not a professional, this is a participant, then that puts an idea in someone else's head saying, oh, I could also be a participant. So that's the whole, or one of the whole ideas with participation is that it has to have the space of circling further. And that's why exhibitions are oftentimes the first preferred participatory approaches, because they tend to allow some sort of visibility. But I absolutely agree. Museums have to think about participation in so many other different ways. And for instance, in the UK guides, they often also talk about fundraising, donations, giving money. A lot of museums should think about more about how their collections could be inspiring artists, gift shop makers, people who are small-scale entrepreneurs. Again, it might be a participation on one person, but it might have a huge impact on the museum gift shop sales. So it is about the question of where and why this makes most sense. And again, managing participants is expensive, and that's why the why becomes the most important thing. Do we need more resources? Okay, maybe participation should go towards fundraising. Do we need more manpower? Maybe crowdsourcing is the best way to go about it. Do we need more ideas for exhibition? Maybe we have public discussions, look at the feedback. So there are many different ways in which we can take account the people around us. And I don't think any one way is better than the other.
Thank you for that. Would anyone like to add? Chiara, would you like to say something?
So I think that participation means also to give to all the visitors the possibility to visit the museum and to understand the contents and the message, and not to address only to a specific public, but different age, different culture, different origin, different history, with different history knowledge. And so we have to speak to everybody to be to create participation. And I think that we have to be the designer of participation, and we have to involve as much people as we can, so not only historians but also museology and pedagogists, in order to talk to the school children coming, because we have not to force students to come to the museum, and we have to talk to also to a young generation, and so we have to, I think, attract every kind of visitors in the museum, invite people to go and visit the museum, also organizing as much events as possible inside the museum, not only the permanent exhibition, but also sometimes temporary exhibition, maybe connected with the civil calendar, and also why not concerts and theater performances and book presentation, or events like the symposium, that is an occasion to visit this new museum. And we can also organize workshops for teachers and students. So we have to share the ideas. The museum has to be something that is open to the public. We don't have to be just blind or deaf to the public request. And I think that we have to approach the topic is in a transnational and multicultural approach. I really appreciate the museum in Brussels. I visited it 3 years ago, because I think that can talk to everybody coming from east part of Europe, but also west part of Europe, is something that overcomes the boundaries and is a very good mix about different kind of narratives. And I think that the resistance that my not mine. So the museum I represent now here is about resistance, and I think that resistance is a turning point of 20th century history, and is a turning point not only for Italian history, but for every country that experimented totalitarianism, that is right-oriented, left-oriented, Nazi, fascism, every kind of communist of totalitarianism. So I would like to design a participatory museum, in physical museum, but also some online museum that can talk to everybody, listen to everybody's voices.
Thank you very much. Martin or Karolina, would you like to add anything to that question? No? Okay, we have a little bit more time. We have time for one more question. Yes, the lady up there. Can you put your hand up, please? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for this most inspiring conversation. My name is Katarzyna Jagodzińska. I actually research museums as a scholar, and I did follow Pille's publications, and I did research Museum of Warsaw, especially the Praga Museum. So I know from my research that there aren't many participatory museums. There are some that make participatory projects quite regularly, meaning like inviting people into various processes and collaborating, giving them voice. And there are lots of museums that basically test participation. They do one-time projects to see how it is, and they just drop it. I know it's difficult. It requires openness to the results that are very uncertain. It requires flexibility. It requires courage on behalf of the museum. So the question is, it would be lovely if all of you could answer, what are the threats of the participatory museum or of participation in a museum? What museums can or what museums should be afraid of?
So, Karolina, straight away, off the bat.
I can try to risk to give my opinion. I don't know if it's like, please don't treat it as like a general answer. It's, if we make the scale smaller and we don't talk about the public or the society that participates in creation of the program of the museum, but we just try to think about the staff of the museum that really participates in the creation of the program. The problem is, it's a wonderful idea, but you will never make everybody happy. And the risk is that even if you think only about what is in the museum, this one works? Okay. So even even with a smaller group, it's a huge risk. And it's great to have the discussion. It's great to gather opinions, but to have a big museum being made entirely participatory, I think that it might be a disaster, because you will never make everybody happy. And from my experience, I have a big curatorial experience, so perhaps it is a small field, but many times I lived a situation when in the issues of when you create an exhibition, a compromise to make everybody happy very often brings bad results. So that's why I guess that many museums try to do it by pieces, to have this march of taking very strong sometimes decisions. In if a museum is very small, I think it might be an interesting way of creating an entirely participatory museum if we understand the participation not as having visitors, but as society who creates the narration and how it looks like with us.
Thank you, Pille. Your turn to take this down.
I will quickly take a stand and say first of all, oftentimes people, the first thing that they think what's most horrible with participation is obscene information that people will send in and submit. So we have had people drawing dick pics on the participatory walls. So that's the first thing people think about. But that's not the most horrible thing, because those you can easily erase. One of the most troubling things, which for me is increasingly difficult, so I don't have a good answer what to do in this case, is when we have, let's say, we have a participatory event around climate change. And then there comes a group of people who are saying, like, we are a climate change non-believers. And we have a right to have our voice heard in this exhibition. So, or people who say, you know, we don't really believe that the Earth is round, so we'd rather have our voice of Earth being flat represented in this exhibition. So when you are, for instance, you are an ethnographic museum, you can say, okay, there are a plurality of groups, there are many different opinions, but if you're a science museum and have done a participatory event where people say, you know, vaccines don't work and the Earth is flat, then you have a huge problem, because on the one hand, you don't really want to silence anyone, but on the other hand, some things are just plain dumb and should not be presented as part of the polyvocal, non-authoritative open museum space. So for me, the world in this post-truth era, where some of the truths that everyone has taken quite granted for. Democracy is good, freedom is good. But what do you do then when your participants start saying, yeah, but we'd rather have an authoritarian regime with a good, strong-handed dictator? Or we'd rather have a way of let's remove some voices from the history, because that is our right as participants to tell you that you should not tell these stories. And of course, as a museum, you can say that we have a dialogical position, we can negotiate, but as there are increasingly extremist voices that will, for instance, use a polyvocal national museum to say, see, this museum says that we have the right to be nationalist, we have the right to say we belong in this country and no one else does, then the museum's participation sometimes needs to be limited and curbed. So I think for me, the whole idea of when participation really challenges the truth is a tricky one to square.
I do like this coming to the lectern now. We are really short of time, so Chiara and Martin, Chiara first, and then Martin, a quick sum up of what was asked. If you'd like to, of course, we don't have to. Does your mic work?
It works?
Insane.
Yeah. Perfect. So great. Yeah, of course. So just 10 seconds to say that I really agree what they have said. So if you visit one museum, you can have different opinion about the museum, and not everybody could be go to the exit of the museum with the same feelings. So someone will like it, someone will doesn't like it. And anyway, I think that every kind of museum has to spread the values of democracy and human rights. And every narration is good, and we don't have a fixed point of view. We can change point of view, but we have to share basic point of view, that is freedom and fight against every kind of dictatorship.
I think we are all dealing with similar issues there, but yeah, just to reiterate, basically, if the topic is more controversial, it's maybe not settled in the society yet. You have to be aware of these questions that might come up. You need to be prepared for them, and have facts prepared to kind of say, okay, you might think that, but we actually know that it's different. Yeah, basically, you've more or less summarized everything. So, the time is right now. So I think we should stop about now.
Okay. So, I would like to thank our amazing panelists whom we had a chance to listen to today. Martin Klimza, Chiara Nencioni, Pille Pruulmann-Vengerfeldt, and Karolina Ziębińska-Lewandowska. A round of applause, please, for our amazing speakers. This concludes today's sessions. Thank you very much. And of course, everyone's invited from tomorrow morning. So thank you very much.